descendants would be Leviim, who would be participating as part of the two different versions in Chazal, 24 Mishmaras HaLeviim, 14 Mishmaras HaLeviim, it's not clear what's 14 or 24. They would be singing Shira, they were children of Shmuel, and he assumed that he was slated for such glory that he could not fail. And he could challenge even Moshe Rabbeinu and triumph. So it was the what's what I'm looking for, this premonition, this prescient sense that I'm headed for glory that infected him. Now the truth is, predetermined or a preconceived premonitions about the future can trap us in two different directions. There's an interesting novella, a small little book, story, written by Henry James, an English, late 19th century to a 20th century English author, called The Beast in the Jungle. And he talks about a person who has a premonition of accomplishing something great in life. But they become trapped by that because every decision has to be oriented around that great glory that they are convinced awaits them. And the person can't marry, the person can't take a job, the person can't make any of the normal decisions that most people make in life because they're trapped by this beast that's crouching in the jungle, metaphorically, about to pounce on them, but they never, in a positive way, but they never know when it's going to seize them and when it's going to emerge, and therefore they're always in suspended animation, always held back. So very often, ambition can take away our free will and free volition because we stream and collapse all of our experiences into those great things we expect to accomplish. More often than not, it doesn't trap us, but it derails us. And ambition, because it speaks to our virtue and our nobility, and we convince ourselves that our actions are taken for idealistic reasons, and the free world will collapse if I don't become the president or the head or the rabbi or the teacher, and what will happen without me, and I have the solutions, and I'm the only one. So it speaks to your virtue, it speaks to your nobility, as opposed to some of the other traits, such as, addiction, desire, avarice, where you know that these are toxic and negative and unhealthy traits, and you're engaged in battle. Sometimes you defeat them, sometimes you don't defeat them. But this is harder to defeat because it attaches itself to your nobler side. So Korach becomes a monster of ambition, amongst other things. There's so many layers to Korach. He's a demagogue, he's a cynic, he's a manipulator, master manipulator. He's jealous, intellectual dishonesty, so many different issues with Korach. He radicalizes, but this, according to Chazal, seems to be at the root of it. He convinces himself because he knows the future. And he's willing to cross all red lines to get to that future, which he thinks is predetermined and inalienable and irrevocable. And this is where we hit the intersection between Parshas Korach and what we're going through. What happens when you know the future? And that question is now being transported from an individual level, Korach thinks he knows the future, to a collective level. Because we're engaged in historical battle, and we know the future. We know how this all ends. We know the Nevuos. We've read Yeshaya. We've read Zechariah. We've read Yoel. We've read Amos, just to name a few. We know how this all ends. And it's dangerous in general because we know how it ends. We just don't ever know how it will get to the ending and how quickly and how rocky the road. And sometimes people who feel they know the ending, they take shortcuts and they're willing to act in illogical or sometimes immoral ways because the end is foregone and the conclusion is foregone. But in particular this week, where we feel that we're getting closer to the end, and even if we can't frame the great nisim we've experienced this week within the overall Ikvasa de Mashiach, where are we, at what stage, but there's a general sense that we're zocheh to nisim, a general sense that our condition is safer than it has been, a general sense that we're not facing a nuclear holocaust, a general sense that others are joining us in this battle. And that has to be acknowledged, and that has to be given religious voice. If you're not already adding to your Tehillim a Tehillim of praise, then maybe you should. I recommend Mizmor L'Soda, Parak Kuf. It's pretty easy. It's 4 psukim, I think, and you know it by heart. So instead of just rattling off, not that they should be seen as rattling, the Shir HaMalus is about the ongoing dangers, but to thank Hashem as Chizkiah was critiqued by Chazal for not saying Hallel after his victory, even though there was so much danger still awaiting him, and the north had already been demolished by the Assyrian army. But had he said Shira, he would have advanced the messianic trajectory, and he didn't, and therefore he wasn't Mashiach. There's a story in which Rav Aaron Lichtenstein, my Rebbe, Mori V'Rebbe, there was an illness in the family, and he was in the waiting room with his family in the hospital, and they were all furiously davening, saying Tehillim, and at some point the doctor came out to inform them, giving the all clear that the medical crisis had been resolved, and everyone started hugging, kissing, wishing Mazel Tov, and whereas Abba? Abba was still in the corner saying Tehillim, and they said, Abba, someone came and said, Abba, don't you know that we've been given the all clear sign? And Rav Aaron said something to the effect of what I should only daven when I need Hashem, not when I want to thank HaKadosh Baruch Hu, something like that. I don't know if he switched his tonality, but it's strongly, strongly encouraged in your shuls, in your schools, in your home, just to add a mizmor l'soda. There were statements yesterday in Eretz Yisrael by Rabbanim, we should not say Tachnun. Some even suggested saying Hallel without a bracha. My netiyah, and I imagine most of the inclination of people that are listening to this, probably, I don't know, but I imagine, are not to play around too much with nusach hatfilah and not to suspend tachanun based on personal initiative, although that depends a lot upon which culture you're part of. In the Hasidic culture, tachanun is much more elastic. I believe some of the Rabbanim who suggested suspending tachanun yesterday came from a more Sephardi culture where there's also more flexibility with tachanun built in. In the classic Litvish Ashkenazi culture, tachanun is tachanun. There's a roster of days you don't say it, and the only debates are Yom Ha'atzmaut and Yom Yerushalayim. But other than that, you don't just play around with tachanun. And in general, because we're still facing significant danger, which I'll talk about in a moment. But anyway, there's nothing wrong with adding Mizmor L'Soda, or if you want to have a little bit longer, more time, Ranan Tzadikim B'Hashem, Nishmas Kol Chai Tivarach. Those are two good ideas to add to your tefillos. But, and here's the but, I think there's euphoria, and we're looking into the future in a very Korach-like way, not as dastardly, not as sinister, not as criminal as Korach, but thinking, well, now we have the all-safe signal, and we know exactly how the Middle East will be reshaped in a few weeks after this war concludes, and our situation will be exponentially superior, and we can go to sleep at night and finally sleep, and anti-Semitism will fade, and the Arab world will accept us into their arms glowingly and happily, and the Abraham Accords will devour the Middle East. I hope it happens. I'm not a party pooper. I really deeply, deeply hope it happens. But our Masara, in general, is to be cautious, and in particular when it comes to Achris Hayamim, because there's so many nooks and crannies, and so many twists and turns that we don't really know about, and Hashem has kept from us. And we keep davening, and we realize that as triumphant and as euphoric as our accomplishments were this week, life doesn't necessarily, and history, and human history, and redemptive history, doesn't lend itself to neatly packaged sine curves and neatly packaged trajectories. And there's still a country called Russia, and there's still a country called China, and they haven't had their last say, and Iran still has its potential, and the Arab world still isn't very thrilled that we are in Eretz Yisrael, even though some of them have come to agreements with us. Who's to know when the Iranian threat is removed, how solid those agreements will continue to be? Many of the agreements with the Arab countries were reached not based on Ava, She'ena Tluya B'davar, L'Shem Shamayim, but as your enemy, the enemy of my enemy, is my friend. And because of their fear of Iran, they got closer to Israel. Now we hope that it's infectious, and we hope that it's contagious, and once they see who we are as a people, we're peace-loving, and we want to try and improve the Middle East, hopefully they'll accept us. But it's hard to know. And the medrash I kept thinking about this week is Mordechai Yoshev b'Shar Melech. After, not Yoshev, I don't have the exact passage in front of me, Chazar l'Shar Melech, Mordechai went back. It's after Haman is exposed, and after Haman is hung, and after we start to recover, and there should be big parties and big relief in Shushan, I'm sure there were, Mordechai returns, and Chazal say, Chazar l'Sako v'ta'niso. He continued davening. He continued with the sak va'efer that he put on, even though things were looking up, things were looking favorable, things seemed to be positive. Esther had convinced Achashverosh, Haman was executed. As we know, nothing is ever so simple, and Jewish history is never, ever so simple. So I hope that by the time you hear this shir or listen to this shir, everything I said has been proven false, and I've been a prophet of doom that has discussed ideas that should never have been tabled. But my sense is that we should feel the euphoria, thank the Rabbanu Shalom, Ilu Finu Mal Shir HaKayam L'Shaneinu Rina, and not ignore the bravery and the courage of our fighters and the stoic strength and resolve of our people who have faced so much over this year and a half, and in particular, close to 2 years, and in particular, over the last 12 days with the shelling of our people and the waking up in the middle of the night. Everything should be acknowledged, should be celebrated. Mikyam Chayil Goyachad Baaretz, to thank HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Kir Beisa Tovos Elai, but to just check out and assume that we have decisively defeated and we are now in a different world and the Middle East will be reshaped. Kabdeo v'chashteo. We wait, we daven, we don't ignore it, and part of living through Geula is holding two different emotions at once. Euphoria, triumph, gratitude, joy, expectation, anticipation, but also not assuming that we see the future. We do see the future, but we don't know how far off that future is, and we don't want to fall into the Korach trap.